Now, there's no denying the fact that throughout its lifetime, for better or for worse, Nintendo has always liked to do things their own way through various experiments. Even today, this can still be seen with the company's very own cardboard armada, Nintendo Labo. However, there's one certain experiment of theirs, or rather string of experiments, that has really proved to have some unique results. Nintendo's foray into the world of messaging and social media. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and coming from someone whose first portable system, or rather one of the first, was the Nintendo DS, I actually grew up with Nintendo's very first step into messaging, PictoChat. Now, PictoChat was really only setting the groundwork for what was to come, since in reality, the program was just about as simplistic as they come. Firstly, since the DS and the DS Lite had no internet capabilities built into the system, when you'd open a chat room on PictoChat, only other people nearby could join. Thus, at least for practical purposes, PictoChat was a bit counterproductive, since unless you wanted to chat with someone in the room next to you, by the time you were actually in range to connect to someone, you could just talk to them face to face. Instead, what at least I, and I'm sure many others used PictoChat for, were its other, more artistic features. As like the name implies, not only could you do standard stuff like sending messages, you could also use the touchscreen to send drawings to people. Of course, 9 times out of 10, this would result in me and my friends just screwing around with the feature, but it was a nice little add-on that at least back then was pretty cool. Plus, unbeknownst to many, since you could scroll through past messages you've sent and copy previous messages, people even made little animations through the program that are honestly pretty impressive. And it's not like this was some small program nobody really cared about. Nintendo would continue to support it in their DS's all the way up to the DSi XL. Hell, I wouldn't even be surprised if the small community of people who made animations would end up inspiring the creation of another certain program we'll be getting to soon. Though before we get too ahead of ourselves here, I have to also touch on Nintendo's next little experiment with messaging that I'm not sure too many people even remember at this point, the Wii Message Board. And while I won't spend too much time on it, since the messaging side of it was more like an email client than anything, considering you could attach images off an SD card and send it to other Wiis, it would only be a stepping stone for the much larger scale projects Nintendo would soon serve up. Back on the DSi and its extra large counterpart, enter Flipnote Studio, Nintendo's all-new application that was basically a far more advanced version of PictoChat's artistic side. There were more customizable tools, you could create and edit frames. Hell, you could even import really awful looking pictures into the program. And since it was free, it would end up introducing thousands to the art of animation. But wait a second, how does this have to do with messaging or social media? Well, while Flipnote Studio itself doesn't, its online counterpart, Flipnote Hatena, is a whole other story. To put it mildly, Flipnote Hatena was like Nintendo's very own little Newgrounds. Well, at least animation-wise. And the community that came to inhabit it was honestly quite large. In Japan alone, within the first 6 months of the service being live, Flipnote Hatena had already received over 1 million animations. But how did the service work exactly? What else could you do besides watching and uploading Flipnotes? Well, surprisingly enough, Hatena had a lot more intricacies than you'd imagine. Like take its channel system, where Flipnotes would be put into specific categories like music or games, and later on in the service's lifetime, popular users would even lead to the addition of new channels like stick figures. Though much like another certain video sharing platform that was on the rise during Hatena's lifetime, Hatena also had its own little rating system, stars. But unlike normal rating systems found just about everywhere else, Hatena's was a bit special. You see, unlike the simple system of liking or disliking a video, the stars in Hatena were less of a rating system and more of a bizarre economy. I mean, normally, say on YouTube, you'd be able to either like or dislike a video. On Hatena, you could give a Flipnote as many stars as you wanted to, leading to a good ton of Flipnote creators solely focusing on getting as many stars as they could, all in an effort to reach the most popular section, section, which was basically the Flipnote equivalent of the YouTube trending tab, thus being coined as star beggars by the community. Though it doesn't end there. In addition to the regular stars, there were also colored stars, with each color being more rare than the last. Now, there were a variety of ways to get your hands on these colored stars, reporting inappropriate Flipnotes and being popular to name a few, but the main and easiest way by far was to physically purchase them in a box. This led to the aforementioned absolutely bizarre star economy on Hatena, with a bunch of Flipnotes being made just to earn these special stars. But besides the strange star system, Flipnote Hatena was honestly pretty great for the short time it was around. I remember back in middle school spending entire days solely working on Flipnotes to post on the service. And I wasn't alone either. Just look at how incredibly detailed some of these Flipnotes were. I mean, hell, at Flipnote's peak, people were even making full music videos through the program. Though unfortunately, to the dismay of thousands, it wouldn't last for very long, because with Flipnote Studio's successor, Flipnote Studio 3D, on the horizon, Hatena would close its doors on May 31st, 2013, taking with it a vast community of truly talented animators and artists. But wait, this shouldn't be a big issue. When Flipnote 3D hits, then it'll have its own online service, right? Well, yes and no. In Japan, yeah, they actually did have a successor to Hatena, two in fact. One being just in between friends, and one being worldwide. However, only a couple months after the friend-exclusive successor was released, it was completely shut down due to Nintendo's concerns about users exchanging friend codes over the internet to send other users inappropriate content. So in turn, whether it be due to this or something else entirely, we'll never really know, since Japan got to keep its worldwide service all the way up until earlier this year. When the West finally got Flipnote 3D, there were no online capabilities at all, just about killing what was once a thriving community. And while the remains would go on to form sites like Pseudo-Memo, a fan-made service that basically emulated Hatena in all its former glory, when its creator was exposed for exploiting minors in his community, what was already a fraction of Hatena's massive community became even more fragmented. So sadly, with Flipnote Hatena meeting an abrupt end, it's time to move on to the next of Nintendo's ventures, this time in messaging again. Because at the very end of 2011, Nintendo released Swapnote, a successor of sorts to PictoChat that, unlike its predecessor, actually had internet access. And for a while, everything went pretty great. I remember, at least in my case, it had become a weird form of texting between my friends before any of us had gotten phones. Plus, with them adding little stationaries and new features like the capability to send photos, Swapnote had become pretty popular. However, with the addition of sending photos, Nintendo soon found out the hard way that when you add internet capabilities to something, you also absolutely have to have a vigilant team of moderators ready to take on all the people who will try to exploit it, which sadly in this case, Nintendo had the low number of 0. So as a result, after finding out that minors would share their friend codes with strangers, who would then coerce them into sending pornographic photos through Swapnote, on October 31st, 2013, Swapnote's internet capabilities would be shut down indefinitely, with Flipnote 3D's situation being an unfortunate casualty. Afterwards, Swapnote would go on to be a shadow of its former self, with the only messages you could send being through Street Pass. Though, unlike being left to die like Flipnote, Nintendo actually cared this time and released Swapdoodle. Albeit it came in 2016, but hey, better late than never, right? Basically, Swapdoodle is Swapnote in all its former glory, internet capabilities and all, except without the ability to share photos or audio. Why they couldn't have just removed those features and kept the internet access in Swapnote, nobody will ever know. But all that aside, it's time to tackle the big one, the one all of these little experiments would end up culminating to: Nintendo's very own social media, Miiverse. Now, Miiverse was definitely an interesting service, to put it lightly, which, at least for me, serves as an eternal archive to some of my more regrettable years. Though before we get to that, what exactly could you do on Miiverse? Well, a lot of things, actually. On Miiverse, every game that existed for the Wii U or 3DS had a community, where you could share in-game accomplishments, comments, and just general info with other users. Hell, some games even had unlockables that directly linked back to Miiverse. Plus, taking from their past experiments like Swapnote and PictoChat, you could draw on Miiverse as well, leading to the genesis of even more talented artists. All in all, when you look at Miiverse individually, it should have had no problems running smoothly throughout its lifetime, and it really didn't, that is, at least from the service itself. Instead, like the countless times before it, the main issues Miiverse would face were the people who'd go on it. Simply put, people would try to test the moderators as much as possible by posting things ranging from crudely drawn dicks to things you'd expect to find on the darker sides of DeviantArt, particularly on the Splatoon community, which, oh boy, I wonder why. Thankfully though, this time around, Nintendo learned from their mistakes, and these posts would disappear as soon as they were posted. It's crazy, there would even be movements like Miiverse After Dark, where users would actually compete with each other to see whose lewd artwork would get the most comments before being deleted. Though at least with them, Nintendo was already prepared to deal with posts of that nature. What they weren't prepared for, however, were the role players. Because believe it or not, Miiverse roleplay was a thing, and we're not talking a couple roleplay posts here and there. In the first 2 years of the service's lifetime, these people would absolutely flood certain communities with seemingly endless threads filled with poor grammar and edgy OCs. It had become so bad, especially in the YouTube community, that when Nintendo redesigned Miiverse in 2015, they actually indirectly addressed the matter by giving everyone on Miiverse a post limit of 30 posts a day. Honestly, there's so many little things like these that happened on Miiverse that I could probably make an entire video on the matter, but for now, we'll leave it at that. All problems and weird people aside, the Miiverse community itself was actually pretty wholesome, and while in my case the service serves as a reminder of how edgy I was 4 years ago, I know a good bunch of people that had a great time on it. So with the service ending last year after a solid 5 years of running, Miiverse was undoubtedly a big success, and seeing how the Switch doesn't have its own little social network like Miiverse, it may end up being the last in Nintendo's long line of social media experiments. But wait, actually Miiverse isn't all dead. In Splatoon 2, to replace Miiverse's integration in the first one, they actually brought back the function of posting messages and drawings. And needless to say, it's just as wild as its predecessor. Let's take a look at some of the most recent stuff. Yeah, that's about what I expected. So in the end, while we've yet to see what Nintendo will try out next in the vein of everything we've talked about, at least now, they'll be prepared for just about anything people will throw their way. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe, and today's cool thing of the day is Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Talking about childhood nostalgia, this series has to be one of my most beloved childhood games, especially Explorers of Time. I mean seriously, this game was one of, if not the first video game to actually bring me on the verge of tears when I originally played it. Not to mention the soundtracks to them are absolutely amazing, and funnily enough, have been in more videos of mine than I can even count at this point. And who knows, with me diversifying my content more and more now, you may even see me make a video on it pretty soon. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.